Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Conor O'Gara. Will, Super Bowl? Are we still dealing with a Super Bowl hangover? Are we feeling better by 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon of the day that everybody should have off?
Yeah, I'm feeling great. I actually had a meeting pretty early this morning, so I had to kind of, halftime, just start hanging out, preparing for the future. I said, I felt Blink 182, and they said, I guess this is growing up because I'm sitting there going, okay, what are the best Super Bowls of my life? And I'm just having a great, wholesome time with my boys. I got to watch the Sponge Cast on Nickelodeon. That was super fun. People ask me all the time, Will, why do you have multiple TVs? Well, I have to watch all these SEC games, or I choose to, right? But they don't factor in the Sponge Cast. And I think that's really what the X factor is.
Shout out friend of the program, Noah Eagle, on the call for that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Noah Eagle's rising star, voice of Big Ten football, very, very soon here on NBC. The game itself was, I shouldn't say the game. The second half was what I hoped it would be, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
And overtime and all of that stuff. If you don't have a dog in the fight, I think that's kind of the ideal scenario. Now, that's outside of bets, because bets, you do have a dog in the fight, but entertaining from at least the halftime performance on. Like, even Usher was really good. I would have liked a little bit more Alicia Keys than what we got, but that's neither here nor there.
Right.
It was good overall. Like, I really, really enjoyed it. Just Mahomes being so inevitable and all that. Like, when I really knew it was over, because we made our picks the other day, and you might have thought a certain way like during the game, but when I realized that this game was going to come down to Pat Mahomes versus Steve Wilks, I thought, give me Mahomes, please.
Yep. That's a good callback. And we were talking about that the other day with Steve Wilks and how just bad that Mizzou defense was under him, and how Blake Baker was seen as a savior when he turned that defense around because of how horrible it was. And yeah, I think, it's classic Kyle Shanahan. I think the defense held up fine, but it was just like 9 decisions that he may have made one right that they had this game. They went from being totally in control of the game. And that's what was so great about this. It was not some all-time generational performance by Pat Mahomes. It was the fact that he had to battle and come back, and they had to, the second overtime Super Bowl in history. First one, Shanahan also lost in a very moment near and dear to my heart. So that's the thing, is that, I think that it was great television after watching so much slop for the last 2 years in terms of the regular season and even some playoff games where it's like, who is playing quarterback today? We ended up with the most entertaining 4 teams, I think, and then the most entertaining 2 teams. And we ended up with one of the most entertaining Super Bowls I've seen in a while. So it's pretty cool.
Will, can I confess something? This is trust tree, right? We're in a place where we can freely express things that happen to us that might be a little bit embarrassing. But you know what? I'm comfortable enough with my football acumen to admit this on public airwaves. I was kind of trying to figure it out on the fly with the overtime rules. I was.
Mm-hmm. Hey, so are the Niners. So that doesn't, you have a brotherhood with you there.
Yes, I was not playing in the biggest game of my life, but my own home watching this, and I'm trying to figure out, like, oh yeah, I get it. It's a new game that starts, and they're trying to do the matching thing. Each team will possess the ball both times. But when they kept saying over and over again, like, it's a new game, I'm thinking to myself, did I miss something where it's the score when the clock hits 0 on the overtime period? And so the entire time I'm trying not to focus on the clock because they keep telling me that it doesn't matter and that both teams will have a chance to possess the ball. But at the same time, it's like, hey, if the Chiefs score a touchdown here, it's over. I was just a little bit lost in moments that I'm usually not while watching a football game. And I did not feel totally confident in myself to mansplain what was going on to Lauren.
To me, it's obvious. It's that college football figured out overtime perfectly, but the NFL will not admit that college got it perfect. And so they have to just keep making up new stupid overtimes that are all going to be worse than the college one, just because we've had so many games in with like a star quarterback not having a chance to get the ball in overtime, and it's happened to Breeze. And so point being, like, that's the worst way to do it. So they tried to, like, finagle this new rule in there where it's like, well, you both kind of get the ball. To your point, it's like, does the clock matter? Does the clock? I think it's just a stupid rule. They did just pick up the college one and be like, hey, no harm, no foul in that.
At least we didn't have Mahomes not getting the football because the Niners kicked a field goal in overtime. So I guess that is the win. But you're exactly right. College overtime rules, at least the ones that don't get weird after the second overtime, are still the best, in my opinion. Excellent show on the way today. We have Barrett Sallee coming up in a bit. We dig into the wild move by Chip Kelly to leave his head coaching position at UCLA to take the OC job with Ohio State. Talk a little bit about Bill O'Brien, the opportunity that opened up for Chip Kelly to be able to go to Ohio State. Barrett has kind of an A&M 180, not quite a 180, but close to a 180 on the Aggies, and then talk about some of the future of this current coaching cycle and a few other things with him. And then we've got Jersey contest and Lad of the Week. But first, the big news over the weekend that wasn't Chip Kelly, that wasn't the Super Bowl, was that Ryan Grubb is actually not moving at all. He is staying in Seattle. Crazy concept. He is not going to become the offensive coordinator for Kalen DeBoer's first staff at Alabama. That came out late Friday night that Ryan Grubb has made the executive decision. Moving sucks. I am not going to do that. I will be the Seahawks offensive coordinator. Can't fault a guy who doesn't want to move. We've all been there. He will also be joined apparently by Scott Huff, who coached that Joe Moore award-winning offensive line at Washington, who was set to join DeBoer and Grubb at Bama. But he is also reportedly going to the Seahawks, which is definitely significant. But weird that it came out when it did, the timing 3 days after the signing day thing, where if you saw the photo from the next round where Ryan Grubb is saying, I'm the next offensive coordinator at Alabama. Nope.
And then the caption's like, he's not going anywhere, haters. Well, there he goes.
Yeah, the comments revisiting some of those, I definitely did after we saw the news late on Friday night. You revisit it. It does feel, and I referenced this the other day, it feels a little bit like Ben in Parks and Rec with the accounting firm. It's the same thing. It just felt like Bama had finally locked down Ryan Grubb after I thought he was going to go there last year in what would have been Saban's final season, but they couldn't get him then. They thought they had him this time, and apparently that they couldn't. The third time, though, with Ben in the accounting firm in Parks and Rec, he at least gave them cones of Dunshire, which is, I think, the nerdiest thing that I've ever said on this show. And they got to have fun with that. The accounting firm did. I don't think Ryan Grubb gave Bama a cones of Dunshire. I don't think so.
Yes.
Maybe.
And again, it just feels like no matter how much we legislate stuff, right? I mean, Grubb announces this decision like 11 minutes before the transfer portal window closes after signing day. So the players that thought he was going to stay kind of got trapped there the same way they would have before the portal. So it's all that maybe that's what he left behind was some players that thought they were going to play for him.
Maybe, yeah. When you see that report from the Seattle Times that this came out the second week of February so that Bama could perhaps avoid this during the 30-day window wherein players on the roster can transfer without penalty. You see some of that and you're like, well, that's fishy. That's kind of messed up that they would do that. And I realize that there's still a spring window. I also realize that Bama very much got screwed by the 30-day window existing and the fact that everybody could just go into Bama and just pick out these players because tampering isn't investigated, all that stuff. So there's a feeling like, oh, hey, this is gamesmanship, and this is just kind of the other side of it. I think there's more of a problem with the window itself.
Right.
If the window is 10 days, we're not talking about this. It's not really a thing. But instead, we're now left asking questions about the Bama offense that had Ryan Grubb, but never really quite had him. I think for starters, it's a huge loss. I think you can still call it a loss because it was the expectation that he was going to be Alabama's offensive coordinator. I think it's just significant that he won't be there. Perhaps that's the better way to phrase it. Washington, as we know, 107th in scoring offense before Grubb and DeBoer arrived. They were 7th in 2022. They were 13th in 2023. When they got to Fresno State, they took over the number 125 scoring offense in college football. They improved it by 10 points per game in year one, and then another 7 in year two. Those guys are good at what they do. They elevate the places that they go. They are not Brian Harsin 2.0. I don't know how many times I have to say this. I do not think that is what they are. Of the 10, go ahead. You have a take about Harsin, and there's a certain name that you might have called Kalen DeBoer that I don't know. Do we want to make it public, or can people just go on your Twitter?
No, listen, I don't think either of those guys, the OC or the offensive line coach, are Brian Harsin. But I will say this, and you'll probably get around to it later. I actually don't think losing Grubb is that big of a miss, just because when you've seen him by himself, he hasn't been as impactful as when he's with DeBoer. That offensive line coach is huge. Huff. And we talked about that at the time. That was the coaching hire that I liked the most that was made by Alabama, was going from the worst offensive line that we've seen at Alabama, or one of the worst in Power 5. Let's not be, let's be fair here and say, okay, well, if you look at the Washington team that won the Joe Moore Award, and we could debate were they number one, were they number two? Who cares? They were one or two, right? So point being, that was a position group that I thought was going to get turned around immediately by a very talented guy in Scott Huff. And I do think that's worth saying that he's probably the biggest loss.
I'll still say that Grubb is bigger just because the ability to call plays and do so at a high level in college football is still of great value. But I agree. They're both very significant. And we know that with Grubb and DeBoer, they've had this partnership, this relationship that dates back 17 years. Of the 10 seasons that they have been coaching at FBS schools in the playoff era, they have been together for 9 of those seasons. The lone season that they weren't together was 2019 at Indiana. And we know that Grubb stayed at Fresno State instead of following DeBoer to Indiana. DeBoer at Indiana takes over the number 88 offense in the country. And then boom, he steps in, elevates it by 5.5 points per game. Did that with total autonomy on that side of the ball with a defensive-minded head coach in Tom Allen. Indiana won 8 games in 2019. Should have won 9. They blew that bowl game against Tennessee. Tennessee fans, don't get mad at me for saying that. It's 100% true. Indiana blew that game. Tennessee deserved to win, but Indiana very much blew that game in typical Indiana fashion. That's the way that it works. It was still Indiana's first 8-win season in 26 years. I think everybody remembers 2020 more so when we talk about when Tom Allen was actually good. Nobody actually talks about that that's listening to this show. But if you're going to talk about the glory years for Indiana, it is years and not just a year, because they were good in 2019. Will, before that 2019 season, do you know how many times Indiana won 8 games in program history? Just take a guess.
Oh, man. See, that's a double-edged sword because there were fewer games back in the day. In the history, I'm sure they have like 100-something year history. Oh, man. I'm going to say like 4 or 5.
It's not a bad guess. It's 7. That's
okay.
It. Yeah. A few years in the Western Conference. How Indiana was Western at one point. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if like Princeton's East, then you could be West if you're in Indiana. That's fine.
People forget Indiana didn't join the Big Ten until I think the early 1950s. So some murkiness there with the schedule. Didn't quite dig into the strength of opponent, strength of record metrics for the early 20th century. But you can kind of add that up in your own mind. That year, IU in 2019 averaged 31.8 points per game. Did it matter that Michael Penix went down with one of his many season-ending injuries? That actually wasn't a knee. That was like a collarbone deal that he went out with. And Peyton Ramsey came in and ran the offense, which ended up with an even 36 pass attempts per game to 36 rush attempts per game. Peyton Ramsey, Michael Penix Jr., very, very different players. Very different players. When DeBoer didn't have Grubb, he did not collapse. He adjusted. Do I assume that means that he will be perfectly fine without him? No. But if you're under the impression that DeBoer's entire standing as a college coach is just because of Grubb and his presence, I'd argue that's probably a bit shallow, probably not looking at the entire picture of who he is as a head coach.
And like I said, the opposite could be more true. That's the thing, is that maybe DeBoer elevated Grubb. We still don't exactly know about that. I do think of the two, DeBoer is definitely the better coach.
Yeah, they have said many times, like, I am great in part because I have this other person with me. And sometimes, that it's okay to be willing to admit that, not which one it's the chicken or the egg type deal. Yeah. And we always want to give one person more credit than the other. And sometimes you just realize this just works with them together. Here's another reality, though. At some point, Kalen DeBoer was likely going to have to replace Ryan Grubb at Alabama and figure things out. That was inevitable. If he did his job well, or if he didn't do his job well, this wasn't probably going to be some Kirby Smart situation where he was a coordinator for 8 years. And remember, even Kirby eventually left. Like that was best case scenario. And he eventually left to obviously do his own thing.
And to your
Maybe.
point, if you're getting NFL OC job offers, which he obviously was because he took it, right? What does it really make any difference to say, I'm going to move my whole family to Tuscaloosa, I'm going to get kids out of school? I don't know what his life situation is, but moving sucks, as we've talked about. So it's like it probably would have been for a year or two, because if the NFL's already knocking on your door and the Seahawks are just a perfect fit, right? So that's probably why he went a little bit earlier than he would have. If Pete Carroll was still there, if he had a staff in place, maybe he waits that extra year to get a better, more perfect job. But you're like, yo, I don't really got to sell my house. This is already in Seattle. I'm good to go. Like, I already have the job offer that I want. So there's no reason for me to keep trying to get it. And to your point, potentially mess up the bag.
And I think too, if you're hoping that a guy is going to stay in that role as a coordinator for a long time, and you're saying, well, what about like a Brent Venables? Brent Venables at Clemson, yes, best case scenario. Also eventually left Dabo Swinney. And now we're talking about Dabo Swinney adjusting without Brent Venables. And what do their defenses look like year over year? And how much are they developing there? Like, it's inevitable. I mean, Saban did this so many times, and we talked about it a million times over of this coordinator hire and that coordinator hire. Like, it never just gets to be, well, oh, you're just going to have this person at your side for the duration of your time at a job. It just does not work like that. And maybe loyalty to DeBoer would have kept him in Tuscaloosa like a year or two after there were more fish starting to bite. Maybe that could have happened, and that could have benefited DeBoer. That's possible.
But you could also end up like Matt Campbell. Everybody wants you one season, and the next season it's like,
Great point.
Left on red, yeah.
That's something we might have to dig into with our time capsule episode is the things that were being said about Matt Campbell and these up and coming coaches, how quickly that can change and how fleeting that can be when you're in a position like that, where you're not at your destination job. I don't care what Ryan Grubb says, even if he had gotten in front of those people at the signing day event and said, this is where I want to be for the rest of my life, to be calling plays as an offensive coordinator at Alabama. I don't believe that's the case. That's just never the goal. And even if you are better at that, it doesn't mean that that's where you want your career to just stop. So it's interesting. It's really interesting because I think Grubb has shown plenty of loyalty to DeBoer and vice versa. If you go back and look at this relationship over the years, despite the fact that it played out this way at Alabama, there's a great story in The Athletic about their relationship, and it ran in December right before the playoff semifinal game, where DeBoer called up Grubb in the summer of 2007 and offered him the job of, get ready for this, offensive line coach. Also, in addition to offensive line coach for $2,700 for 5 months, we need you to be the assistant strength and conditioning coach and the equipment manager. That was Ryan Grubb's entry, his first full-time job into college football. And he took that at that time because in that point of his life, obviously you have a coach on the other end who's coming off of an NAIA national championship. Mm-hmm. DeBoer would eventually go on to win 2 more. That's not a big part of the resume. It's just the part of the story. But at the time, Ryan Grubb is 31 years old, and he's living in his sister's laundry room in Sioux City, Iowa, which is not to be confused with Sioux Falls, South Dakota. At the time, Ryan Grubb is an early 30-something, like in between where you and I currently are right now in terms of age. And his full-time job was pouring concrete. He had finished up being an assistant at South Dakota State. He did that while pursuing a 2-year master's degree. So Grubb at age 31 is just trying to become a full-time head coach. And who's the one who calls him to give him that first opportunity? It's Kalen DeBoer, and the rest is sort of history. Those guys are close. They got better together. So
that was at Sioux Falls, South Dakota. That was like at his first stop at Sioux Falls.
The 2007, and he was living in Sioux City, Iowa, which is confusing.
Right.
Yeah, very confusing.
That echoes the point I made initially. We talked about this. This dude has 7 jobs. He's a very talented gentleman. We know that from now. But he had 7 jobs, and that's cool.
Yeah, had a bunch of different jobs, man. If you're, I try and put myself in that spot, and how badly do you want to get into an industry? And sometimes I think back to the days of when I was applying for jobs, when I was living at home post-college, and I had 6 months where I was trying to figure out, where is my first full-time job going to be in this industry? And I tell people all the time, I applied for 60 jobs over the course of that 6-month stretch. And I got 2 job offers. The first was very early in the process. It was in Yuma, Arizona. It's about 10 miles away from Mexico. It's not a bike ride away. It's very far away. and the other was being able to work in a newspaper in Central Nebraska. And so you think about all the different things that you would be willing to do during that stretch. And when I guess you're living in your sister's laundry room in the middle of Iowa, pouring concrete, which, look, I'm sure he made a decent living pouring concrete full time. I'm sure he did. But realizing I will do anything. And this guy gives you that opportunity, you're always going to want to do right by him. And maybe that origin story does have something to do with why they were able to get to this place and why it has felt like those two have been so synonymous and so closely linked to one another. But now, obviously, it will be different. It will be very, very different. I don't judge year one coaches. We don't do that. I try not to. I don't want to speak just totally on your behalf.
No, that's a little pact that we made when everybody was freaking out about the first couple of years. It's like, let's just give them 1.5, probably. You kind of tell by that second half year mark.
Yeah, exactly. The 22 cycle was what made me kind of develop that stance when you had all these big time programs that were making new hires, and it's USC, it's LSU, it's Notre Dame, it's Miami. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, man, just try and tap the brakes. Just tap the brakes a little bit on some of these things. So I'm gonna try and do that as much as possible with DeBoer, as difficult as that is with his one-of-one situation. But I do think about him trying to establish that offensive identity as he tries to show that his offense can work in the SEC. And that's a big selling point with recruiting, with fan support, with NIL support, all of those different things. With Grubb and Milroe, you would have had one of the best offensive minds in the sport with the guy who finished higher in the Heisman Trophy voting than any returning player in college football. And now you don't have that. Now you don't. As I said when Grubb appeared to be on board for this job, that still would have been probably a pretty significant adjustment from what they ran at Washington, because we know that Milroe and Penix are wildly different quarterbacks who see the game in a much different way, and the personnel did not lend itself to run the exact offense that we saw at Washington the last couple of years. That's not my way of saying it absolutely would have worked no matter what. There just could have been some growing pains, and in reality, there could still be some growing pains with a new play caller that isn't Ryan Grubb. I suppose that's a good thing that even without Grubb, I know that Milroe's play caller, whoever that ends up being, will not be Bill O'Brien or someone saying that I think you would be better off not playing quarterback. So that's a win. That's a win long term. Bama and Ohio State both kind of dodged a bullet. Not Bill O'Brien as the OC is a strategy that Bama fans can get with 100% approval rating. No doubt about it whatsoever.
I'm so furious we don't get to see him at Ohio State. That is the one human who I think could have really turned that thing into an issue, and I'm so sad because it would have been funny.
I should have looked at national championship odds before and after the Bill O'Brien, Chip Kelly swap happened and what exactly that looked like. I don't suppose that it changed drastically, but am I ranking Ohio State a little bit higher knowing that Chip Kelly's running that offense instead of Bill O'Brien? Probably. Yeah, probably.
Really, and there's a good point in there, too, which is that, Ohio State had already gone through 2 offensive coordinators by the time this happened. Chip Kelly is not answering the phone because he is moving to Columbus, right? So that makes their current situation in Alabama interesting. That's why I say it's sometimes good to have an offensive-minded head coach like DeBoer, because it's like, if you had Coach O out there, you would not know what to do right now. You'd end up with some bum who had total autonomy. Whereas now it's like, if you look at, when you start to look internally, that's when your head coach is kind of the guy it's kind of like Saban calling the defense last year. They talked, like Lane Kiffin said that. It's like the defense can only get but so bad under Nick Saban before he just starts doing something. That's the opposite of the advantage of DeBoer, which is like, if you lose Ryan Grubb, you can kind of just figure it out for a year until you could really hire someone if you want to.
So what does DeBoer do? That's the question that we need to ask, right? It's, as you mentioned, like, this is a situation in which you feel fortunate that you have an offensive-minded head coach. Do you pivot and say, all right, I'm going to promote Nick Sheridan to that role, or and do kind of like a co-op thing where it's internal? And again, like, I'm not really focused so much on who gets the title of offensive coordinator. Like, I think that's a little bit overrated. I care about who's calling plays. That's right. The thing that we're talking about today. What your actual title is different than what your responsibilities are at so many of these places. So that's the question. Are you going to keep this internal? And do you have somebody on that staff already, like Sheridan, that you can just promote and say, okay, you're going to run my offense? Or is DeBoer going to do what some have suggested, which is call his own plays? You know how I feel about that.
Not great.
I don't like it. I don't like it. I much prefer the Heupel Kiffin CEO approach than the I've got to do it all approach. And now more than ever, I would so much rather do that. And I hope that he delegates. I hope that he delegates those responsibilities to Sheridan, or it's an outside hire or somebody like that. If there is a Kirby Moore situation, God, what if Mizzou got both of its coordinators poached from teams in the SEC and you lose Blake Baker and you lose Kirby Moore? I don't think that'll happen. It doesn't look like it's trending in that direction. But again, this is, I guess, all on the table. And let's all remember this too. If we don't treat Saban and Kirby as primary play callers, if we assume that those two coaches were not the primary play callers for their respective teams, no coach in the playoff era has juggled primary play calling duties and won a national championship. Think about that. The last one to do it, ironically enough, is Jimbo, 2013.
Offensive genius.
No wonder he's like, hey, I got this.
He was running that play called Jameis Winston throw the ball very far.
Yes. Yeah. But it is something that needs to be kind of kept in mind with this, because I think we've seen that when DeBoer can run a program and he has someone that he trusts calling plays, like Ryan Grubb, obviously, he has been the best version of himself. In that Athletic story, Grubb had this quote about DeBoer's role in Washington's offense and why he still feels like he has control. And it's not something where it's an offensive-minded head coach that's micromanaging all the time. Grubb said, quote, overseeing a top 5 program is a mother load. He's got a lot more to worry about than red zone offenses. Yeah, Grubb is right. It is a mother load. It absolutely is. It is also a mother load to take over a program that has had offenses that scored at least 32 points per game in each of the last 15 seasons. Wow. There is a high offensive standard. Yeah, think about how many different offensive coordinators have been rolling into Tuscaloosa and have done that and have kept that up dating back to 2009. That's when that streak began for Alabama, which coincidentally is when they started winning national championships. Alabama doesn't do mediocre offense anymore. Okay? At their worst, they're like 25th, 30th. They're still what you would call one of the better offenses in the sport. Okay? Not maybe one of the best offenses every single year, but one of the better offenses.
Yes.
The good news. And this is what I just feel like has been the saving grace of this entire deal of having kind of an awkward exit with someone that looked like he was going to be the top assistant on that staff. I can't imagine DeBoer was totally caught off guard by this. I don't think he was. And Greg Byrne told the Tuscaloosa News that they knew this would be possible. There was always a plan in place if that did happen. I do believe that to a certain extent. I don't think that was the expectation. I don't think that was, they brought him on board and then they just hoped that he would do a bunch of recruiting for him. They always knew that he was gone. I don't think that's the case either. And
But it also didn't happen, at midnight that one night. That's the other thing. And I imagine this dynamic in a way similar to my buddy John, who you've seen me work with. I worked with John at this point for 12 years, and there's only been one little period where me and John didn't work together. And guess what I did? Brought him as a freelancer, because that's the dynamic that we have. We work so well together. And if this was me and John, I would kind of know how he felt pretty early. You know what I'm saying? So that's my thing is hey, if you have that type of relationship, you call your boy up and you're like, hey man, what's the deal? They're not going to lie to you because they have that much respect. So yeah, that was kind of what I started alluding to, is that it was much closer to he knew from the beginning than he knew 11 minutes before the transfer portal closed.
Yeah, but even if you knew that there was a possibility that this was what Ryan Grubb wanted and he had NFL aspirations, I would still take that chance. I would still take that chance.
For sure.
Even if it meant I've got some egg on my face, I've got to make a new hire, I've got to pivot, I would still take that chance, because what if he doesn't get that job? What if he has this interview with the Seahawks that doesn't go particularly well? And then you're like, hey, we have this guy who is still on our staff, and I don't care if NFL teams are to come after him. That's a sign that he's doing something right. So that could have been on the table as well, even though everybody, of course, wants to connect the dots and assume that this was this conspiracy theory of they knew that this was going to happen and they just wanted to be able to get players on board. It's like, it doesn't have to be like that, but ideally Alabama didn't want this exact situation.
That's such a good point too, because you can kind of see that played out where you go, hey man, how'd the interview go? Oh, dude, they loved me. Straight up, I feel like I really represented myself well. I feel like they love the concepts I presented. I feel like they complimented my fit. Oh, dude, I'm feeling so good about it. Versus Yeah, man. Like we've all had interviews like that. We're like, yeah, man, this isn't gonna be for me, dog. Like I bet he knew that much. Is all I'm saying. Exactly what you just said. You know.
We did a figuring out on that a little bit ago
Mm-hmm.
about that dynamic of telling your superior, telling your boss that you're leaving for another job. And
Yep.
I've always I've always been fascinated by the examples that have come up with Saban and going into Saban's office and telling him that you're leaving for another job. And anytime we have a Saban disciple on the show, I feel like that's a question that I ask because
Mm-hmm.
there's the Dan Enos example, which is just what not to do in that
Yeah.
case, and just be like, oh, I'm heading out. I'd like to avoid this conversation. And then there are others that have obviously had to look that that guy in the eye and say, hey, I'm going to somewhere else. And it depends on what exactly that is. If it's
Well, if it's
seen as a
Saban,
letter-
probably like the top of his head.
Look, man, it's hard. Like even when I left my boss in Central Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
one of the nicest people that I had the pleasure of working with. It was still one of those conversations where I was like, do I tell him that I'm looking? Do I tell them that I've had an interview with this place or that place? And those guys are tight to where I'd like to think that they had an open line of communication. But, reality is that if you're in a job that is not considered a destination job, which a coordinator job is not, even in a place like Alabama, there should always be that assumption that's just sitting right there. So I can't imagine that DeBoer only took this job under the impression that Ryan Grubb would be his offensive coordinator. I can't imagine that they had the conversation beforehand of, hey, if I do this, will you come with me? And then that's why he left Washington. I don't think it played out like that, if I had to guess. You can do that at Eastern Michigan or Fresno State or even a 4-win Washington squad, which is what they were in 2021 before those two guys came on board. But you're not letting Ryan Grubb's decision sway you from leaving for Alabama. You're just not.
Mm-hmm.
Grubb could have said in that moment, you know what? No, now is the time to fly on my own. I'm going to pursue something else because we talk about that window and how important that is. If DeBoer wasn't going to be able to succeed without Ryan Grubb, he never would have succeeded anyways. He never would have been able to last long at Alabama. So you're going to have to do this at some point. It's just happening earlier than you would have liked and maybe earlier than you would have expected. But it's significant. It's significant that he won't get any of Ryan Grubb as his OC unless he's one and done with the Seahawks. And then he comes back to the college game. Maybe don't rule that out. The college to NFL to college pipeline, whatever you want to call it. It's more fluid than ever, thanks in large part to something that you've talked about a lot on the show, how synonymous. All right, synonymous is the wrong word, but what's the right way to phrase this? How closely aligned their offensive schemes have become in college and the NFL.
Yep.
And that
ubiquitous.
Is
there's a dollar word for you.
Ubiquitous. There we go. That's exactly the word I was looking for. Not really, but I do like that word better than any that I was trying to come up with. Ubiquitous. Some are saying that Joe Moorhead being rumored for NFL jobs as the master of the RPO because of his ubiquitous offensive scheme, that it makes a whole lot of sense. Some are saying that.
People are saying.
Bruce Feldman, ever heard of him? All right. Just throwing that out there. So, yeah, just keep in mind that if this is an outside hire, you're coming in to run DeBoer's offense. And maybe that's a little bit tricky as well. Like we talked about how much with Bama's OC, it was like, you're going to run the offense that Lane Kiffin implemented at the start of the playoff era, and you can put your tweaks on it, but this is the type of offense that we got to run. You're not bringing the triple option to Tuscaloosa and doing anything like that. So full autonomy, debatable. But yeah, it is an interesting development and one that could impact the national championship next year.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, 100%. And, far be it from me, an LSU fan, to be like, oh, dual OCs don't work. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think, in fact, this is probably the second year in a row that Alabama has kind of copied LSU's playbook and said, okay, we go Reese first, then we go co-OCs. I see your game. I appreciate it.
But the co-OCs, does that matter, though? Because co-play callers, like 2019 LSU, is different, very different. People do co-OCs all the time.
Yeah.
Gus Malzahn did co-OCs basically his entire time at Auburn. Co-OCs only matters.
You wouldn't know OC at Auburn. He did. You do what Gus Malzahn says at Auburn.
Right. You're like, oh, hey, you get to have this title, and maybe I'm going to take play calling duties from you. Maybe I'm not, and maybe I'm just going to blame you or whatever. But like to me, I don't really care as much about that. I care more about who's actually up there dialing up looks and how that breakdown shakes out.
Yes, and I think it all comes down to perception slash recruiting, right? Exactly to your point, which is that DeBoer, we talked about that's maybe not his strong suit. So him being a play caller on top of what he's got to do, if Kirby Smart is sitting here going, I'm going to bring in 3 defensive minds to be in this room and just be cooking stuff up all the time, so I could make a little adjustment if I need to, but really I'm on the sideline calling recruits. That's my main job. I'm the CEO. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's part of it. That I do think it would be even more specifically than a Jumbo or a Billy Napier, and a misstep for DeBoer, because it's a new even style of recruiting. It's a new batch of coaches. It's a new part of the country. So I definitely think that elevating some guys and saying, okay, this is going to go on your resume. To your point, your co-OC. What does that really mean? Who's to say? If I'm DeBoer, I'm going to give you a glowing review if you were to move on from the spot regardless. You know what I'm saying? So I do think that it's about next season. It's about, let's evaluate you guys. Let's put you in a little boot camp. Let you know what I like to do in my offense, and you guys take it from there and run. And then that way, another part of that's the media scrutiny. I mean, every single one of these coaches we've talked about, even, Lane Kiffin at times, it's been like, Heupel, same deal when the offense kind of sputters. It's like, well, this is your offense. DeBoer needs to stay as far away from that as possible. He does not need to be answering questions about the specific minutia of his offense and taking the blame for that side of the ball. I would get as far away from that as I could if I was him, just because it's a waste of time. If you're a head coach, it really isn't worth your time to sit there and go through, well, here's why I called this play on this down. Here's why I saw this and this look and this coverage. It's not your job anymore. Like, go get someone else to, not necessarily to be a fall guy, but if they can't answer the question, they don't deserve the job. You know what I'm saying? So put that part of your team and say, let's give you guys some what do they say? Corporate, some on field training or on career training where you're stepping up into a new role. It's like, okay, so if this works, you can stay here and you could have this on your resume and you work for Kalen DeBoer and I'm a winner and it's all good. If you don't stay here, well, what were we supposed to do? Ryan Grubb left us at 11 minutes till the portal closed. We didn't want to go out, hire some outside guy. So now he has time to evaluate for a full year. And it speaks exactly to your point of, this is why we don't evaluate first-year head coaches. Because this offense, if it's dog water this year, that doesn't mean anything to me, because that means to me that DeBoer's not meddling in it. Because if this offense is top 10 in the country and the recruiting class is 100, I'm going to sit there looking at DeBoer like, this ain't going to work very long, brother. You better get somebody in this door.
I don't want the back and forth. I don't want the back and forth. If I'm DeBoer, I'm trying to figure this out now. And even some of the stuff with Ryan Day going back and forth now, you're like, man, you got to figure this out. You got to figure out what you want the future to be, where your needs need to be met in terms of elevating your program. Where do you feel like you're coming up short? What do you feel like you need to do better? And what can you do better if you delegate this to someone else? With DeBoer, it's like, yeah, I think he could run a really good offense. I don't really doubt that. But what happens if he has some of those issues that we talk about with Billy Napier, where all of a sudden you're like, man, God, it doesn't look like this team is prepared to play. They're having this issue on special teams. Oh, man, the recruiting is really falling off. They're not really doing this the way that they should. Oh, their fourth down calls are just horrible when they're going for it, when they're not going for it. These are all things that as a head coach in today's era of college football, you need to be prioritizing. You've got to be evaluating talent in the transfer portal and doing that and signing off on that. What does that part look like? It is just such a different ball game. And so, yes, you can give me examples where it's worked. Okay. Like I'm fully aware that there are examples where it has worked. I think for the most part, in the direction that the sport is heading, we will look up 3-4 years from now and the amount of head coaches at big time programs who are calling their own plays will be so minimal. It really will be. Like there is just so many other things to have to worry about. So I'm not going to look at that as like, oh, he doesn't really believe in himself. Some might try and spin it that way or something like that. To me, as you said, it would be a great sign if you're willing to actually look at it from a 360 view and say, this is what I feel like I need to be able to maximize my abilities and what I personally do best. But yeah, look, this is part of the job. This is all about the decisions that are made after you are hired. That was going to determine Kalen DeBoer's longevity at Alabama, just dealing with a little bit more adversity early on than some would have expected.
Yeah, and I'll say, these are two ideas, that go the same direction, which is okay. Old boy at Boston College says, oh, this isn't about the kids anymore. It's about the NIL. I'm leaving. I'm going to go, work for the Packers. Oh, they offered me 3 shares. How could I turn that down? Like, look, ownership. You're not going to be ownership in Tuscaloosa anyway. So point being, okay. Then same deal. Chip Kelly, boom, stepped down to go be. Of course, Chip Kelly steps down. You know what I'm saying? Because it's about NIL. It's not about the kids. It's not about the kids. Well, DeBoer comes out on the other side and says, actually, I have time for the NIL, for the special teams, for the recruits, and for the it's like. Hold on. Everybody else is saying they don't even have time to coach and be head coaches to just be head coaches. So I hate to say it like this, but I think DeBoer's smarter than that. Like, I think he's going to realize those new challenges in the new area of college football and say, people are leaving the sport because it's not about coaching anymore. I can't afford to really be a position coach and also handle the stuff that's scaring people away.
Do you think that when Jeff Hafley gets his 3 shares of the Packers, they present him with 3 separate certificates and he gets to have all of them framed and put them in a different room in his house and show that he has this amount of shares with the Packers? I don't know. Maybe that's part of the gig. I haven't gotten to that level of coaching. Who am I to sit here and judge that? It's
probably like that certificate they gave Drew Brees when they broke the completions record. They just handed him a PDF at the midfield. Those are the shares right there.
Don't get it twisted. I love a good certificate. Degrees are just glorified certificates, if we're being 100% honest. We hang them up. We take pride in them. I'll just never forget my Packer fan friends who, look, they're great people. Absolutely love them. We've gone on vacation with them. They are awesome, and I love so many things about them. But being like, man, so that's what we're taking our pride in. All right, that's fine. I'm very biased. I'll just continue to be a hater. Jeff Hafley's now got 3 more shares than I do. It is what it is. All right. Anything else on this before we kick it to Barrett?
Yeah, no, this is just the most fascinating. Like, that's the thing is that, I texted you early and I was like, this is the most interesting thing that's ever happened in college football since we've been covering it. You talk about expansion, you talk about stuff, but this really is just a reset of this Alabama job and the power, because they had all the power. All right. You want me to say they had it for 20 years. It was like the king is just ruling with an iron fist, and empires would rise and fall, and they would still be sitting there. Now it's like, well, who's the new king? That's the thing. That's when revolutions tend to happen, is when you get a new king in there. You see that in the British situation right now, where Queen Elizabeth was super, maybe not popular, but at least well regarded, right? And now, you have a new king. How does that work? So I think that's the deal, is that this is this destination job in college football for sure. I mean, there's no question there. So every little bit is going to be scrutinized, and if you're a Bama fan, that's a good thing. With Saban, it was, well, Saban can handle it. With DeBoer, it's how will DeBoer handle it? And that makes for just a better conversation,
Better conversation. Bama was going to be too dominant if Ryan Grubb had come on board, and now everybody else is. No, okay. Please don't take that seriously. All right, let's take it to Barrett. We discussed Chip Kelly, the A&M 180, not quite a 180, close to a 180, predicting longevity of this current coaching cycle and a bunch of other stuff. So here's Barrett. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Barrett Sallee. Barrett, correct me if I'm wrong. Your rooting interest in the Super Bowl is just rooting against Kyle Shanahan?
Pretty much. I mean, he's the reason the Falcons lost to the Patriots. We still hold grudges. I look, the dude lost the playbook before the Super Bowl, and then he decided to throw passes when literally all the Falcons needed to do was kneel down. So, I really want him to feel pain constantly, and after the overtime loss, I hope he feels it.
I look, for your sake and for the sake of all Falcons fans listening to this, I kind of hope that he just continues to blow double-digit leads.
It'd be awesome.
If he does that, it makes 20-3 just easier to stomach, because it's like, it's just a Shanahan thing. Which, look, it's clearly looking like it's shaping up to be that way
for sure.
Let's talk Chip Kelly here. It's wild to think about an active Power 5 coach willingly leaving for a coordinator job in his conference. But if you dig into the situation, there wasn't really alignment with the AD. Chip doesn't like recruiting to begin with. I don't think he liked it as a lame duck coach. And with the new NIL world that we live in, it probably would have just been brutal all around for this year. Why do you think the timing unfolded the way it did with Ohio State, when he reportedly also had interest in becoming the Iowa OC, which is just a crazy, crazy thing to even say out loud?
That would have been awesome. Not going to lie, that would have been wild to see how Chip Kelly and Kirk Ferentz, how that relationship would go. But, I think it's interesting to me because Chip Kelly's interest really started to become reality when the NFL season ended, right? Or when teams started, bowing out of the playoffs or whatever. And so I think it became obvious, hey, Chip Kelly's looking to go somewhere else, most likely the NFL, and he didn't get those jobs. So stepping down to become the Ohio State offensive coordinator is a slap in the face to UCLA. Obviously, the relationships had soured, but I mean, this is a guy who doesn't like recruiting, obviously, but he's still going to have to do it at Ohio State. And yeah, you're not dealing with all the administrative stuff that a head coach is. And I get that. And that's got to be annoying. I can't even imagine living that life, but you're going to still have to do a lot of that. You're still not going to just be able to coach ball like Chip Kelly wants to do. And you're going to have to still answer the questions that higher profile players are going to ask about NIL and about things like that. So it's odd to me. It's a slap in the face. And obviously the timing is mostly due to Bill O'Brien leaving. And so for that, Ohio State fans, just that news in and of itself is good, because I don't know what Bill O'Brien would have done at Ohio State, but it would not have been successful. And now you get Chip Kelly calling plays. So Ohio State fans have to be thrilled. But for Chip Kelly, it's a slap in the face to UCLA. There's no doubt about it. And I think it is certainly a reflection on the new era, but I don't necessarily think Chip Kelly is going to get to avoid some of those things that frustrated him at Ohio, and now that he's at Ohio State.
Is it a good fit? That's what I'm kind of wondering about, because you could do this all over college football and kind of match up different offensive minds with that program and say, oh, if only they had this offensive mind, they'd really, take that next step. And look, I think Ryan Day deserves a lot of credit for being willing to have an ego like Chip Kelly that's going to be on your staff, which is not something that a lot of coaches would sign up for.
No.
But I kind of wonder, is this going to be a fit? Is this going to really take that offense to the next level? Because I think Ryan Day is a better play caller than the average Ohio State fan probably gives him credit for. But to see this now in this role, it's just a fascinating move that we're going to scrutinize because we just have to, and that's what Ohio State has set themselves up for.
Yeah, it's going to be wild. And I think part of it, too, is that Will Howard was there and Chip Kelly had nothing to do with that. And so they bring in Will Howard from Kansas State. He wasn't going to start at Kansas State. I think he's incredibly overrated. So what is Chip going to do? If he doesn't pick Will Howard to run the offense, what's Ryan Day's reaction going to be? Because that's the guy that Ryan Day picked out. So, I think there's already some situations that I think can transpire that would test those personalities. And I think Chip will be fine with the weapons that when you have Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, it's going to be really hard to screw that up. And I think there's the one thing we know about Chip Kelly is it actually is a run-based offense now. And it has been at UCLA and really was at Oregon when, he was sort of installing that new age spread that has been picked up and copied all around the sport. So to me, it's more about who he picks at quarterback, because Will Howard can't win you a national championship. Julian Say and Aaron Nolan might be able to. Devin Brown might be able to. But that decision, I think, will test that relationship. And I think let everybody know, like, hey, is this going to be harmonious, or is this going to be Jimbo and Petrino? Is this going to be, Les and Matt Canada? Because it could go in that direction.
You're really not high on Will Howard at all.
He's not good. He's not.
So how did Kansas State have a top 10 offense last year? Is that just all Colin Klein? Does that lead to more of a belief in? Okay, so then that means that you're doing a 180 on A&M, and you're a believer in A&M now that they don't have Jimbo Fisher. Is that a fair thing to say? Like, because when we talked last year before the season, you took a lot of heat. That clip that made the rounds, of course, when you're like, are we really doing this again with A&M?
I was right. Just saying.
You did end up being right. The offense was better, but you were right about Jimbo as a whole. So where are you at right now with the Aggies? Is it safe to say you've done a full 180?
A full 180? No. Am I like at 110, 120? Maybe.
Okay.
Because like addition by subtraction, right? Jimbo's not there. That's phenomenal news for Aggie fans. The offense will be fine, right? It will be fine. I'm more concerned about the structure of the program, right? How does the game management of Mike Elko impact the decisions of the entire offensive staff. They're not going to win the national championship. They might be an 8-win team with the new look offense. And honestly, if you're an A&M fan right now, 8 wins, the full Jimbo Fisher might be all right in the new era because you don't have those expectations, right? It's not like it was before when you expect to go to the playoff with Jimbo. 8 or 9 wins should be fine this season. Not moving forward. Now, moving forward is different, but I think from an offensive perspective, yeah, they're going to be much more creative, and creativity leads to being competitive against much bigger teams, much better teams. And, the schedule's the schedule. I get it. But, I'm a higher on A&M long-term, but this year, the Jimbo Fisher special should be tolerable. And honestly, I would view that as progress because you're not taking a step back with a coach who's only had 2 seasons of head coaching experience.
With Jimbo, with Chip Kelly, Jonathan Smith, those were the last 3 hanging on in terms of Power 5 coaches from that post-2017 cycle who were still at their same jobs. Now all of those coaches are gone. It's a wild thing to think about with how splashy that cycle felt, and to think that we have already moved on to this different era for a lot of teams where, look, there were coaches in good standing. Jonathan Smith obviously was, but they have moved on to other jobs. So let's look to 6 years from now. I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell me if these 5 coaches and I'll go one by one, if these coaches will still be at their job 6 years from now. So that's the start of the next decade, 2030 that we're talking about. So let's start with Jeff Lebby. Yes or no, he will still be at Mississippi State in 2030?
No, I don't. I think that is going. Look, Mississippi State fans are going to have to be patient, kind of like Texas A&M fans. They're going to have to be a little patient with the guy. Mississippi State fans aren't necessarily patient when things get to year 2 or year 3. So, no, I don't think he will be.
Sharon Moore, Michigan.
Ooh, yes. I would say that he picks things up right where they left off. As long as they don't expect national championships every year, or even, if he misses the college football playoff every once in a while, fine. As long as they don't expect that, then yeah, he'll be there.
Jed Fish at Washington.
Oh, man. I hate saying yes for this, but I might say yeah. I mean, new look Big Ten. Yeah, he's there in 2030. But that might be the ceiling. I mean, that's really hard. I'd say 51-49. Yeah, he's still there.
Barrett, I think this is the longest he was at a job in the last 17 years or something like that.
Yeah.
He was at Arizona for 3 years.
At some point, you got to settle down, though, right?
I would think moving sucks. He likes moving. He's a sicko. Yeah.
I really hope he hires movers. This is total sidebar. Don't ever do it yourself. It's awful.
No, after what's the final age that you should move yourself? 24, 25?
I would say it's more on status, right? If you're married, that's the make or break point. If you have kids, movers, 100%. But if you're married, it kind of depends on where you are, townhouse, real house, renting, owning, things like that.
You could there's college movers and stuff. You could get 2 kids for a couple of hours. That's going to be worth a couple $100. Absolutely.
Yes, for sure.
Kalen DeBoer, Alabama.
No, I don't think he'll be there. I think that for him to be there, he would have to win multiple national championships early in his career. And I just don't think he can do that.
Even if he wins one, getting to what would be a year 7, that's what we're talking about. You're getting to year 7 if you're still at the same job in 2030.
One's not enough. Even if they make the playoff every year, one's not enough. Because think about this. Yeah. If he only has one, but he makes the playoff every single season, but consistently loses in the playoff, that's not going to go over well.
Sure. Bill O'Brien, Boston College.
Boston College's expectations are low. Bill O'Brien will not be there because if he succeeds, he'll get another NFL job. And if he fails, 6 years seems like too much to tolerate at Boston College.
It does. It really does. Okay, bonus one then. Mike Elko at A&M.
Dang it. Connor, you're killing me. Mike Elko will still be the coach at Texas A&M in 2030. It will be dependent on, if Texas A&M makes the playoff once in those 6 years, Mike Elko will still be at Texas A&M. Now, if it's only once and they've been good but not great and lose to Texas consistently, that might be the end. But if they make the playoff once, that'll help.
Okay. I think that I think you gave a very fair bar for these new hires, because everybody assumes that they're going to be there for the entirety of a contract, and the numbers are kind of showing us like one, maybe two of those guys will still be at.
Let me ask you this. This is something that I thought about when I was doing the show. I guess it was Friday. Does Kalen DeBoer have NFL aspirations? Because if he wins a national championship at Alabama over the next 4 years and makes the playoff twice, let's just say, and he gets a call from whoever, not the Chargers because Harbaugh's there, the Rams, or because we've heard
McVay,
that McVay might want to just retire, which would be awesome if he just lived the retirement life. You think he goes?
I think it depends on his standing at Alabama and if he's exhausted. Spurrier left Florida for the NFL because he was exhausted. Saban, I think, always had that part of him, that competitor side, that just wanted to scratch that itch. DeBoer's never had an assistant job even in the NFL, whereas so many of these coaches at least have somewhat of that background. So it's tricky. I think so many things would have to line up for that to make sense. He strikes me more as someone who really does like the college job, and even if it's not at Alabama for 10, 15 years, I think he would stay in there. But it's a question that I feel like we have to open up to pretty much to a lot of these guys now. Just kind of wonder, and I don't think it's going to be a trend. I do think it's at least a fair question to ask.
Yeah, and when you think about this, he's been okay with the college game, but it's getting worse in terms of time management, and it's going to it's just worse now at Alabama in terms of the pressure that's on him. So I don't know. It was something I was thinking about, and I mean, the be all end all in the minds of Alabama fans is Alabama. Like, that's the pinnacle, right? But for some people, it might not be, and it might get it might become more of a possibility as, DeBoer's in year 3 or year 4 and things haven't fixed themselves in terms of the calendar in college football.
Could be. Did you have a favorite hire of this cycle?
Man, favorite hire. You know what? Not really. I didn't really. I mean, I thought there were some good ones, right? Like Sharon Moore, like that. It was probably Sharon Moore.
Yeah.
Right? Because Michigan could have gone not Brian Kelly. I'm not necessarily saying he would go, but gone after Brian Kelly or gone after somebody who has a much bigger name. Like, they didn't outthink the room. And I think a lot of times ADs like to outthink the room. And the promotion, when you have a promotion like that, I think maybe a lot of ADs, maybe this is a thing of the past, but they view that as sort of a backup plan that will keep the fan base content, but not necessarily make them excited. I think Michigan fans are excited about Sharon Moore. And I think, for Ward Manuel, he didn't outthink the room, which is, I think, in this case, a good thing, and probably should be more commonplace than it actually is.
UCLA outthought the room and did botch this horribly. I mean, in such horrendous ways. We don't know who's going to take over as of this recording for Chip Kelly after this move. But you want to talk about botching an entire process, because it looked like Jed Fish was just sitting there, possibly available. Jonathan Smith obviously would have been such a home run candidate in the way that we talk about, all those obvious connections. But man, it just feels like there are so many ways that you can mess this up. And Michigan doing the least sexy thing possible might have actually done the smartest thing. But of course, that can just change in 2 years.
Well, and here's the thing too, is I've already talked to a lot of coaches and made contact with some agents, and there have already been a lot of coaches that have turned down UCLA. Flat out said, even before they were even offered or if it was discussed, don't bother, not interested.
But here's the thing too, that brings up a great point, and why I hate this argument. I hated this argument when it was about Scott Frost leaving Orlando for Nebraska, and why I hate the thought of Lincoln Riley left Norman, Oklahoma to go be in LA. And it's like, these coaches it's not like quality of life in that specific area, right? It's not just, oh, hey, you want to be a head football coach and make $7 million to be the head coach at UCLA and live here. There are so many other things that go into that if that's your logic, that's the new, oh, this quarterback is just a winner. It's just lazy analysis to try and say like that's what creates a good job. But it is interesting because I like whatever we talk about is a job of UCLA, what it is. This cycle has hurt it significantly, and it's hard to get around like how much that program it feels like has fallen off in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and if the organization, the administration is dysfunctional, which I think we all know that UCLA's organizational structure is not where it should be.
Yeah.
Why would you leave a lesser job, even if it's a high end group of 5 job, to go to UCLA and get your tail kicked in the Big Ten, right? Because then your stock goes boom, straight down, and you're not getting another job. So like if you're making $4 million as a group of 5 coach, or or you're probably going to get a raise if you succeed as a group of 5 coach to $4.5 million. Why would you, and you're content, your family's there. It doesn't seem like UCLA would even be attractive at all.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a very strange place that the program is in. Last one before I let you go. What's your faith level in Hugh Freeze right now after what's been kind of just a strange offseason, strange end to the season for Auburn?
I still think he'll be fine. I mean, he's recruiting well. I think he'll hit the transfer portal again really hard in the spring. I do have a little bit of a concern in him tying himself to Peyton Thorne more than maybe he should. That to me is the one thing that Auburn fans should be concerned about. I think right now he will be fine and he will compete in the new look SEC for the playoff at times, the SEC championship game at times. Is it going to be a yearly thing? No. Could it be like Gus Malzahn, where 2010 as an offensive coordinator, 13, 17, they're in the discussion, or in 2013's case in the national championship game? Yeah, that might be it. And for Auburn fans, as I know personally, because I went there, that's probably not going to cut it.
Last one, promote Smothered and Covered. And if Waffle House has a partnership that it's agreed with you already.
No, still waiting for that. I mean, if they just want to give me free food, I'm cool with that. But no, no more CBS. Started independently. College football Smothered and Covered. I'm still kind of tinkering on when to go live, if we need to go live, things like that. Trying to do it every day. It might not be an everyday thing. It might be 3 days a week. So still looking at like analytics and stuff. But it's a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun. College football Smothered and Covered. It's on YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that. I could go down a list, but like everybody knows where to find all this stuff. If you know how to find this stuff, it's probably there.
If you know how to find this podcast, you can figure out how to find Smothered and Covered as well, which I recommend. Barrett,
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, really appreciate it, man. Just a quick note. We recorded the interview. Barrett and I recorded that on Monday morning, and before UCLA had named a head coach. They have since promoted running backs coach Deshaun Foster to that role. Wanted to clean that up. It kind of piggybacks on what Barrett was saying earlier. So still think the context of that is still very much appropriate. Jersey contest, Will. If you are watching this on YouTube and you're looking at Will, you might have been wondering this entire time, Connor, you've gotten this deep into the podcast and you have not mentioned the fact that Will has not won, but 2 Carl's strawberries showing on his jersey. We've had a wide variety of jerseys on this show, but 2 strawberries as the prominent sponsor on a jersey is a first, and it's probably going to be a last.
Yes, and this brings never say never, kind of. No, this brings 2 things that I love so much, which is like kind of minor league sports, right? Kind of not like your Euro League, but right under that, and also international sports, right? So this is a Berlin Eisbären jersey, and basically they're like polar bears, like ice bears, and that's the hockey team from when I went to Berlin. Like you said, it is covered in logos head to toe. Kind of looks like a NASCAR situation here. I was disappointed to learn there was not a bathroom in here. But point being, this style of like sports is really like when you fall in love with sports, right? It's like your local team. It's not the Alabama or the Ohio State. And it's like, yeah, it's Indiana or Iowa State. It's like random, as far as college football goes, not the brand, right? But like point being, like it's just cool to see like how these guys will rally behind this team. They have a ton of like national team guys that play in Berlin. They also play at the Mercedes-Benz arena, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, when I went to Berlin, I got to like see their team store and just, me, I love a thick bear. This is my second thick bear jersey. I had the lacrosse one as well. So saw the thick bears, saw they only had one of these alternate jerseys that are sick. And it was a triple XL. And I was like, it's made for me. No one's going to pick this up if it's not me. So here I am.
Yet you do not like the Chicago Bears.
Mm-hmm. Huh. Well, I'm at least indifferent on them because of you,
Okay. I'll take indifferent. That's better than pure hatred. Not a Cubs fan, technically.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that's all right. That's fair. It is. You're right. It is a NASCAR car. It felt weird to say out loud. NASCAR car in jersey form. That is what Will is currently wearing. But look, I am all for the unique jersey. I am all for it. And the ability to purchase a jersey internationally. You know what I regret is being in Greece and not purchasing a Giannis jersey there. Yeah, you get a Giannis jersey in America in the States, but with the Greek lettering where only the real ones would know, that would have been fire. That was 2017. So that was before he like got really, really big. And they still had those all over the place. I felt like, oh, there's a Giannis jersey. There's a Giannis jersey. How did I know there were Giannis jerseys if they were in Greek? I'm wondering to myself. Was it just that there was 34?
If you see that last name, there's not too much you can do to change it to turn it into Greek.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, but like I think I was recognizing even like the front of the jersey. Like maybe that's how familiar I became with seeing them. I probably saw the back of it, and then I recognized the other. That's exactly what happened. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I am not that smart to be able to decipher those things. But I think that's a great addition. We'll have the next round of voting. Follow Saturday Down South Podcast on Twitter at the SDS Pod to be able to vote on the next round of the jersey contest. Lad of the week, Will. Want me to start?
Yeah, go first.
It's obvious. I mean, look, call me basic. Travis Kelce's my lad of the week.
Okay.
And I know he's taking criticism because he got a little bit mad at Andy Reid on the sideline. Who among us hasn't gotten a little bit heated and wanted to at least yell at our head coach?
Listen, he just wanted to be Jordan Poole. He wanted to show out for the baddies.
Again, you're going to have to explain exactly what that means. But yes, I agree 100%. To show out for the baddies, that's what he was doing. He was invisible in the first half of that game. Invisible. And then by the second half, you're like, this dude is still such a unicorn. And the plays that he makes in space, man, it's just not all scheme. And he took over at several points of that game and was just on a different level. And you could see what the headlines are if that first half continued in the second half. And if he was quiet and if he played his worst game of the playoffs, even the amount of people that just would have roasted him and, oh, see, it's Taylor Swift. It's too much. It's blah, blah, blah. And all the outside noise is impacting him. Taylor Swift is the reason the Chiefs don't. No. None of that. None of that. And the guy has just been able to be dialed in. If you could be dialed in with a season like this, the way that he has been in the press, national conversations, like that is remarkable stuff. And so everybody sees the video post game and he's celebrating. Jason Kelce, also a very good candidate for lad of the week once again for rocking the mask. Oh my God. Like that guy has had a time the last month of his life at these playoff games. But they've got the You Belong With Me going at the club, and it's like the club version, and Taylor and Travis are pointing at each other. A lot of people that are going to hate on that. I'm not here to hate on that. The guy is on top of the world. It's hard to be doing a whole lot better than Travis Kelce in this current moment.
Yes, 100%. It's I'm a big believer in supporting what people support and who they are. Taylor Swift, very obviously not my flavor of a woman, but for him it works. And that
not your flavor of woman.
Yes.
Not your flavor of music or not your flavor of woman? Those are two different things.
No, it's not my flavor of woman. I just don't think she's that attractive. But for him, that's the dream, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying.
That's the ape of that style, that archetype, right? That's the that is the best one of the like she is so on top of her career. So many people love her, and the fact that he is able to show out for the baddies, the fact that he was able to do that and complete the goal, and kind of silence the haters, I think is cool. Even though it's not really my thing, I don't really like her music, but I can respect him for accomplishing his goals. Which
you don't really like successful women. You don't really like people that make their own money. You like being able to pay for all the dinners and stuff.
I don't like skinny white girls. That's my thing. If you want to know
Oh.
Didn't think we were That's not my taste. All right. I'm just going to tell you before you frame me. I got a type. It's not that type, but I respect him for having his type. All right.
All right. Yeah. To each their own. Yeah.
Yeah.
More Taylor Swifts for the rest of us. That doesn't make any sense.
There's one, but there, there's versions.
All right, who you got?
Anyway, so my line of the week is similar, but guy that kind of I feel like went uncovered or unheralded in this game in his performance. It's gonna be Mecole Hardman. He's a guy that was great at Georgia. He is a guy that time and time again, the Chiefs have not exactly tried to get rid of him, but he hasn't exactly lived up to his promise. This is a guy that was drafted, in the second round. He was supposed to be, a feature wide receiver for them. He was good at Georgia. He was part of the resurgence with Jake Fromm. And he goes to the Chiefs, and everyone's thinking, oh, Andy Reid's going to find a way to elevate him, take him to that next level. That going as far as to bring in Kadarius Toney, who obviously cost them a game and was just kind of a worse version of Hardman. But he didn't, pout, demand a trade, do all that. He just kind of did his job. And, as you said, Travis Kelce was the leading receiver in this game. But through a half, it was Hardman, and he had a receiving touchdown, which Kelce did not. And so I just think that it's a very cool, story for this guy who has just kind of been on the back burner, counted out. They've wanted to find this style of receiver for a while. People talk about MVS and, just the general receiver core is always under fire for the Chiefs. And I think that in a huge moment, biggest moment of his career, he was able to come up huge. So I think it's just, a testament to kind of what we talk about here, just keeping your head down, working hard, doing your thing. And I think that, they're glad they kept him.
Well, no, he was on the Jets in mid-September.
Oh, wow. I forgot about that. Then he came back. My bad.
Then he came back. Yeah.
Yeah. But being on the Jets doesn't count because that's not an NFL team. So the only NFL team he's played for, there you go.
Very, very true. Yeah, the Chiefs technically are the only true NFL franchise. Did you see his tweet? I think it was this morning. Yeah, it was. I shouldn't even say it was this morning. I think it was 1:00 this afternoon. He tweeted something effective. Still can't sleep. Adrenaline pumping right now.
Yeah,
dude. King. If you catch the game winning pass to win a Super Bowl, 3 days until you can kind of calm down off of that high. You're chasing that high for the rest of your life. There's no high that will be like that on any athletic surface that you touch. The adrenaline, I just cannot possibly imagine it. And the way that it happened too, with him kind of being wide open, and it was like this perfectly schemed look for him to be able to get to the pylon, and he just knows it. I can't even begin to imagine what that feeling was. But good for Mecole Hardman, man. Georgia, some are saying they win a third consecutive national championship with that.
People are saying, yes, my Instagram story would look like grains of rice if I caught that. It would just be molecules. There would be so many of them. I'd be taking pictures with the postman. I'd be shouting people out, saying it on my story. I'd be having a great time. But yeah, like I said, great cleanup on the Jets thing. And it's I think that even still rings true because it's you drift apart, you come back together. And again, every useful player is not, Justin Jefferson. It's everybody has a role. And I think it's just super cool. This team came together in Mahomes, one of his worst statistical seasons. I'd say it was a bad season, but for him, he's used to 50 touchdowns. He's used to these crazy heights. The fact that they leaned on their run game of Pacheco, they leaned on their defense in Spagnuolo, who, hand up, he was a guy I thought was trash after he ruined the Saints defense in 2012. And he was able to respond, and that team was able to really all work together. And it wasn't just the Mahomes show or the Taylor Swift show. That's the funny thing about this team is that it seemed like Mahomes versus this team of the Niners who had all these different pieces. When you look at it at the end, it's everybody really played their role. It was not one guy. Mahomes did not have this great performance. Everybody gave all they had, and that's why an overtime victory is possible.
Now the Chiefs will try and become the first team to three-peat since 1936 Minnesota.
You go.
It's coming. Not quite. Great Ed Widseth will probably revive the Chiefs' chances. They'll have to do stories on Ed Widseth to be able to kind of contextualize what it means for the Chiefs. That was actually a really good story by Seth Emerson, who wrote that. Was very interesting a few months ago when that came out. But yes, the talk of dynasty and three-peat felt like we went from one sport to another. Now the Chiefs will get that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you have not, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on the app formerly known as Twitter, at the SDS Pod, at Set Down South, at TJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.